Messiah, son of Joseph, is referred to, is hinted at in the Bible, and also the psychological build of the Bible, the biblical story and future prophecy, says that the 10 tribes will have an independent role to play before the future reunification. And it stands to reason that some will be headed by some and some will be at their head. So the Messiah, son of Joseph, is not only the individual, he is the whole of the people behind him, in the same way as Napoleon was the head of the French, had the French Revolution, which embodied certain principles, and along came Napoleon and spread those principles. So too, the Messiah, son of Joseph, will spread the principles concerning the 10 tribes, and he will lead the way. And he is referred to in Zechariah 12:10. He is also referred to in early Talmudic sources, or sources such as the Targum, the Aramaic Targum of Yonatan, and other sources in the 300, 400 CE, and later also Rabbi Sadia Gaon spoke of him in the 800s, Rabbi Hai Gaon spoke of him in the 1100s, and he is mentioned, and they said the Messiah, son of Joseph, shall appear in the end times, and he shall be a preceder. First will come Elijah, and afterwards will come the Messiah, son of Joseph, and he will gather the children of Israel around him. He will come to Jerusalem. He will reunite them with Joseph, with Judah, and he will also, according to some sources, fight against Gog and Magog. Some sources say that he will be killed by them, and then the Messiah, son of David, shall come and resurrect him. Others say he will not be killed. We don't know, as the Mohammedan said, we won't know how prophecy plays out until it actually does. Will not know how the verses and the sections of prophecy in the Bible will come to fruition, except when they do so. Then everything will be revealed to us, and retroactively after it happens, we'll be able to see that it was all predicted beforehand. But we are now beforehand, so we can only speculate based on what is there as to what will happen. Manasseh ben Israel, he also spoke of the lost 10 tribes, and he spoke of the Messiah, son of Joseph. In later Jewish philosophy, the Messiah, son of Joseph, is considered as a separate entity. He will a real person, and in some sources he is discussed without relationship to the 10 tribes, but this is implied. The attachment of the 10 tribes to the Messiah, son of Joseph, is implied. Also, the Messiah, son of Joseph, is sometimes considered to embody the principles of Joseph, just as Joseph was taken down into Egypt and sold as a slave in Egypt, and came to rule the country of Egypt, and reformed Egypt, and helped store up wheat for the coming famine. And he saved the Egyptians, and he reformed the Egyptians, he reformed Egypt. And he did this. He reformed Egypt, and so too the Messiah, son of Joseph, will come and he will reform the 10 tribes, and he will begin the task that the Messiah, son of David, will take over from. Manasseh ben Israel lived in the 1600s. He was the author of several books, including The Hope of Israel, which he discusses the lost 10 tribes. So what happened that in his time, he lived in the 1600s. He lived in the time of Oliver Cromwell and the rule of the Puritans in England. And he himself was a Marrano. He'd been born in Spain, and his family had been secret Jews in Spain. His family had been secret Jews in Spain, and they had kept Judaism to some degree in secret for generations. And then they fled to Amsterdam, in Holland, in the Netherlands, where they were allowed to become Jews openly, and they did so. And he himself was self-taught, and he read an enormous amount of material, and also Jewish material and general scholarship, even Christian theology. He knew a lot of things, and he corresponded with all of the leading scholars of his days. Grotius, the founder of international law, used to correspond with him. Others corresponded with him. Even Spinoza learned from him. He was a friend of Rembrandt, who drew a portrait of him. And he was known. And he corresponded with John Sadler in England. John Sadler in England was a friend of Oliver Cromwell. At that time, the King of England, Charles I, had a war against the religious extremists, we would say in our terms, the Puritans, and also against the Scottish Presbyterians and others. And he had lost, and they cut his head off and replaced him. And now at this time, the Lord Protector, Oliver Cromwell, was the effective ruler, dictator of England. And he himself was pro-Jewish. He gave a list of names. Oliver Cromwell, and I saw it myself. He wrote a letter, and he gave a list of the peoples he was charged with protecting according to his understanding of what God wanted of him. And the Jews were up there. And he was friendly to the Jews, and he corresponded with Manasseh ben Yosef. He was also a friend of John Sadler. John Sadler believed that lost 10 tribes, the English were descended from lost 10 tribes. And according to different references and the writings of Cromwell, he also believed in it. And Manasseh ben Israel is famous for believing that the Red Indians in America were from the lost 10 tribes. So what happened? In his time, America had just been discovered. This was the 1600s, 1492, the end of the 1400s. America had been discovered, but it took a while until people started to come there. There were a few small settlements of English people on the northwest coast of America, not very big, and they didn't know what was there. And all kinds of reports were coming back, and a lot of people believed that the Red Indians were from the Lost 10 Tribes, because people were interested in the Lost 10 Tribes, and they were searching for them, and they found all kinds of customs amongst the Indians that they said prove that they were from the Lost 10 Tribes. And Manasseh was read everything and believed everything. He may have been a bit gullible by our standards, and he believed this. Also, there was a Jewish Marano, who had gone to somewhere in Latin America, Central America. He had been shipwrecked or something, and he had become, they say he was delirious, and he had spoken to Indians he met there, and he was certain that some of them spoke Hebrew. Whether he himself knew Hebrew is doubtful, but he was certain that how they spoke to him was in Hebrew. And he came back, and went back to the Netherlands, and he met Manasseh ben Yosef, and he swore on the Bible that what he was saying was the truth, and Manasseh accepted it. So, and Manasseh also collected a lot of material, reports coming indicating that lost 10 tribes amongst Mirror Indians. So they may have been. There may have been some of the lost 10 tribes who may have been amongst the Indians, the Red Indians. We are not so really concerned with that, but that is a possibility. We don't really know. But all events, the important thing is that Manasseh believed it. And he put all this together in a book, Hope of Israel. And he also had the idea that the Jews, in order to bring the Messiah, the Jews had to be scattered all over the earth. And he found Jews in most places of the earth. At that time, the Jews were not allowed into England, at least not officially. They'd been exiled in 1290. And this is 400 years later, and he wanted them to come back. So he corresponded with John Sadler, who had influence. He was a member of Parliament, also directly with Cromwell. And Cromwell agreed that he should come. And also Cromwell sent money for him to come and paid for his stay. Manasseh ben Yosef was famous, but he was always somewhat broke, somewhat indigent. He was always in a bit of trouble making a living. Some of us can sympathize with him on that matter. At all events, Manasseh ben Yosef came to England, and he spoke to different committees, and it was discussed at a legal level. And in the end, it was decided that not to enact any official promulgation, not to make any laws except in English, accepting the Jews back into England, because legally they found there was no barrier to them returning, that the expulsion was not order of the king in 1290. It was not really effective. It was not even legal. Or even if it was legal, it was not binding because it had not been approved by any parliamentary body. Therefore, it was no longer in effect. Therefore, there was no reason the Jews should not return. And therefore, it was decided it's better that the Jews let the Jews come in. We don't have to say anything. It's better that they come in as they are, instead of us writing up some type of legal enactment concerning it, which will probably require us to put certain limitations. What they can do, they can't do. We just let them in, they're better off. So that was how it was left. And Cromwell also gave Manasseh a pension for the rest of his life, but and he returned to the Netherlands, but he died shortly afterwards. That is Manasseh ben Yosef, is the biographical background to Manasseh ben Yosef, and he wrote this book, Hope of Yourselves, first written in Spanish, translated into England, 1650, into English. Translated first into Latin, then from Latin into English in 1650, all in the same year. And in this book, most of this book concerns the lost 10 tribes being amongst the Amerindians. So it's interesting. And I have a copy of this work. But in addition to that, incidentally, also speaks about the lost 10 tribes in general. As we said, there are 8 different places of exile mentioned by Isaiah 11. And he says, he opines to that one of them is America. And the others, incidentally, mentions there are other places, amongst them Europe. He apparently also believed lost 10 tribes amongst the Europeans. And it's most likely that he intended the people of the Netherlands, the people of the British Isles, because the references to this, even though maybe for reasons of his own, he did not emphasize that, it is there. And not only that, Manasseh ben Yosef was writing in his time. And he went to the Bible. And he brings proofs that the lost 10 tribes will return from America. Or numerous proofs. The lost 10 tribes will return from America according to the Bible. He identifies Tarshish with the Atlantic Ocean, the Isles of the Sea with America, and so on. And he brings sources to substantiate that. Now, the thing is, in his time, the present-day USA did not exist. There are hardly any white men in the whole area. But shortly afterwards, Puritans and others from England, from all over the place, people not so Puritan in a polite way, as we could say, being polite, we could say, but people from all over, from all different types. But we understand, based on demographic histories and other indications, that most of the people who went to America, especially those at the beginning, were descendants from lost 10 tribes of Israel. They came from areas where we have traced the lost 10 tribes to Israel to have been, and they went to America and they founded the USA. And they are still there. America now is in our understanding, is a major Israelite nation. That is where the lost 10 tribes descended. They are dominated by the tribes of Joseph, Ephraim and Manasseh, especially Manasseh, and they have an Israelite character. And they are there, and they will return from there. At least a portion of them will return from there. And when Manasseh gives these biblical passages and these different sources saying the lost 10 tribes will return from America, we can apply it to our times. The verses are still pertinent, even though he had different intentions to how we apply them. The truth of his observations and the relevancy of what he said still applies. So we may use this as proof or as the supportive evidence. The lost 10 tribes were in that area and they will return from that area in the end times. And also America is incidentally plays a role, America plays a role that we may attribute to Joseph in general. Our understanding is that people descend from Joseph, Ephraim and Manasseh, also from other tribes of Israel, did go to America, did help create the American state, and they have aspects of of Joseph of the 10 tribes. So another point worth noting is that if Manasseh wrote about it, Manasseh was not considered an original writer, an original thinker, but he was very learned. He read a lot, knew a lot. And if he said anything, he had something to back himself up with. He was a scholar. So also his observations of the certain verses in the Bible refer to the lost 10 tribes returning from America are important for that, and also important for he describes the Messiah, son of Joseph, in the future. He says what we have said, that the Messiah, son of Joseph, in the end times shall lead, shall be the leader, the captain he calls him, of the 10 tribes when they return. And he gives other details which correspond to what we have said. So therefore, we may accept this as a valid source. There's an aside, the Jewish philosophy, the Messiah, son of Joseph, is considered as a separate entity, and he has come to represent different things to different Jewish thinkers. We have a Kol Torah, which was written by disciples, or a disciple of Eliah of Vilna, a great scholar, but it was not written by Eliah, the son of Rabbi Vilna Gaon, but by a disciple of his. But even so, it is believed to reflect the thinking of the Vilna Gaon, of Rabbi Eliah himself. And we use this source, and it corresponds with what we say, and it also indicates that the Messiah, son of Joseph, will be both a process, a historical process, and a real person, and a leader of the lost 10 tribes of Israel. There are a lot of indications in this work. Also, another aspect of the Messiah, son of Joseph, is considered to be the present day build-up of the land of Israel. We have today things which are indicated in Jewish writings would happen. We have today in the land of Israel, a lot of people have left the Judaism, they've left the Jewish religion, they're non-religious, and they have taken over the country. But they're building it up, they're setting up the infrastructure, they're establishing industry and an army and an air force, and merging the people together, bringing them together, encouraging them to learn secular subjects and to build up the basis of an ongoing country, an ongoing enterprise. And they, in different people's thoughts, rabbinical thought, they are putting an aspect of the Messiah, son of Joseph, who will prepare the way for the Messiah, son of David. This does not negate the denigration of the Messiah, son of Joseph. With a real person, it merely says that certain processes pre-adumbrate, they foreshadow what will happen later. In the same way, we find a lot of examples in history, from Alexander the Great, from Hitler, Yamach Shmuel, may his name be cursed, from Napoleon. Napoleon came along and became a great king, but he fulfilled the principles of the French Revolution. So the French Revolution gave rise to Napoleon. Even though how it played out was different, Napoleon did leave a great beneficial effect on the areas he conquered. He helped reform Europe and create the modern world. And so too, the Messiah, son of Joseph, will come out of what is being built up now, and he will embody it and also reflect it, but at the same time, he will return it. He will bring it back to its source, to its religious source, represented by the Messiah, son of Joseph. Another aspect that Rabbi Abraham Cohen Kook, Rabbi Kook, a great rabbi in recent times, and among us, revered very much by religious Jews, he said that the Messiah, son of Joseph, the principle of the Messiah, son of Joseph, was embodied by Theodor Herzl, who helped found the state of Israel, helped found modern Zionism, and he said that the Messiah, son of Joseph, represents the Jew who is assimilated, who gets intermixes with the Gentiles, becomes part of the Gentiles, and as someone who's almost a Gentile, helps reform the world, helps reform the world altogether. And incidentally, one of the reasons for those 10 tribes haven't been exiled, according to the prophecies given to Abraham, and also Rabbi Moshe David Valley, a commentator, said that the 10 tribes were exiled in order to reform the Gentiles from within. And all of these different aspects all come together in the principle embodied by the Messiah, son of Joseph, may come quickly, and may we all be redeemed and become better people. Okay, so Manasseh ben Israel, and the hope of Israel, written in 1650, section 26, he says the following. His language is a bit different because it was 400 years ago, and also it was not his mother language, and he was writing in Spanish, and that was translated into Latin, and then into English, so you can expect a few jumps around here and there, but this is what he says. This is how it comes out. He says, but which way that redemption, in other words, the future redemption, shall be, no one can tell, but only as far as we may gather out of the prophets. Then at that time, the 10 tribes shall come to Jerusalem under the leading of a prince. Some rabbins in the Talmud and some in some places of the Aramaic paraphrase to call the Messiah son of Joseph. Elsewhere, the Messiah son of Ephraim. In other words, Messiah son of Joseph is sometimes referred to as the Messiah son of Ephraim. And he goes on, being slain in the last war of Gog and Magog. He goes according to the version, says Messiah son of Joseph will be killed in the war of Gog and Magog, shall be revived by Messiah son of David, who shall bring him back to life. And he, that is Messiah son of Joseph, as Ezekiel and Hosea say, will be referred to as the everlasting prince of all the 12 tribes. Our wise men do in many places, especially in the Babylonian Talmud and Tractate Sukkah, chapter 5, make mention of the Messiah, the son of Ephraim, where they say that he shall die in the war of Gog and Magog, and they also expand that of Zechariah 12:10. And I will pour on the house of David, on the inhabitants of Jerusalem, the spirit of grace and supplication. Then they will look on me whom they have pierced. Yea, they shall mourn for him as one mourns for his only son, and grieve for him as one grieves for a firstborn. They had also that the 4 captains, according to quoting a Midrash, quoting a Talmudic source, the 4 captains of the end times, the 4 captains of whom the same prophet, that is Zechariah, also refers in chapter 11 to 4 captains, 4 leaders of Israel in the end times, and these 4 leaders are the Messiah, the son of David, Messiah, the son of Joseph, the prophet Elijah, and the high priest, which were the same as those dignitaries who shall show their power in that blessed age. Observe that sometimes they call sometimes call the Messiah son of Ephraim, sometimes son of Joseph. He shall come out of the tribe of Ephraim, shall be the captain of all the 10 tribes who gave their name to Ephraim, because the first king Jeroboam was of that tribe. Not without cause they call him the son of Joseph, who is the true tribe of the house of Israel in his imprisonment and future happiness. That is Joseph. Joseph was in prison, and then Joseph became a great man. So too, concerning the Messiah, son of Joseph, also experienced something similar. Also, he is referred to as a son of Ephraim, because he will lead Ephraim, will lead the 10 tribes. And that Messiah, son of Joseph, shall die in the battle of Gog and Magog, and afterwards shall rise again, that he may enjoy the dignity not of a king, scepter, ruler, but only of a viceroy, as Joseph in Egypt, but that the empire of the house of Israel fell under the son of Hosea, the son of Elah. Hosea, the son of Elah, was the last king, the last monarch who ruled over the 10 tribes before they were exiled. And the prophet, as the prophet Amos 5:2 says, therefore the kingdom of the house of Israel shall be restored, as Ezekiel says in chapter 37, when Ezekiel speaks of the 10 tribes and of Judah coming together and being rejoined, as we see in the 2 sticks, the prophecy of the 2 sticks. Under the reign of Messiah, the son of David, who shall be everlasting. When the Messiah, the son of David, comes, his rule shall be everlasting, according to Manasseh. Others say differently. But however, and he goes on, and by the death of Messiah, the son of Joseph, the 10 tribes will see that God wills not that they should have no more kings than one, as it is already spoken. So that it's a passage concerning the Messiah, son of Joseph, that we find in Manasseh, son of Israel, ben Israel, and this is an early source. And it's important. It's historically important because it's one of the first to especially connect Messiah, son of Joseph, with the 10 tribes when they return. Also, we should note that Abijah, when a source often quoted in connection with the lost 10 tribes, is Abijah chapter 1. All of Abijah is only one chapter, but Abijah chapter 1 verse 17 says, "On Mount Zion there shall be deliverance, and there shall be holiness. The house of Jacob shall possess their possessions. The house of Jacob shall be a fire, and the house of Joseph a flame. There's Joseph and Jacob together. We have whenever we find house of Jacob juxtaposed in this matter, the house of Joseph usually refers to Judah and the 10 tribes. But the house of Esau shall be stubble. They shall war against Edom, that is European powers, especially Germany and others. They shall kindle them and devour them, and no survivor shall remain of the house of Esau. The Lord has spoken, and the captives of this host, the children of Israel, shall possess the land of the Canaanites. Now this is how it's translated. But actually in Hebrew, the Hebrew says different. It says this first hail. This first hail in Hebrew means its first exile. This first host of the children of Israel shall possess the land of the Canaanites as far as Zarephath. Zarephath in Hebrew means France. Rashi was an important medieval commentator. Rashi says that this means France, the land we know as France. Zarephath is known as France, and that according to Rashi is a reference. Rashi says expressing because the 10 tribes went there. The 10 tribes went to the land called France. Nachmanides, who's also no early authority, he says that it meant the far north in general, in other words, the north of Europe. Abarbanel, so it means England and France together. And the 10 tribes are intended, according to Nachmanides, and also Abarbanel implies that. And that is where the lost 10 tribes are. There is another source saying the lost 10 tribes are in those areas, and the people who came from those areas, such as inhabitants of the USA. Also, Zarephath can mean not only Zarephath, but also the Netherlands and all of the region to the north of Europe, according to these sources, and also the British Isles. And from them, the 10 tribes were and still are, and they went and they colonized and settled in North America and Australia and New Zealand, so there too those 10 tribes are to be found. And it goes on, verse 21, then saviors, in the plural, then saviors shall come to Mount Zion, to judge the mountains of Esau, and the kingdom shall be the Lord. So the saviors, when they say saviors, this is a reference, according to different commentators, to the Messiah, son of Joseph, and the Messiah, son of David, who shall unite and join their forces together. And we should also perhaps quote from Rabbi Abraham Cohen Koch. He says that it is due to the relative advantage of Joseph having been assimilated to the ways of the Goyim or the nations, that Esau can only be defeated by the children of Rachel. This is Joseph and Benjamin, quoting from a Midrash. As it says, the axe that chops down the tree itself as a wooden handle, that the lost 10 tribes in effect were exiled. They were taken away by the Assyrians. The Assyrians also were linked up with the Babylonians. The Babylonians, in turn, had a section of them were descendants of Edom. Edom was not only into the southeast of the land of Israel, it also had contingents, enclaves in Tyre and the Phoenician cities, and also in Babylon, Mesopotamia, and other areas. And eventually they went to Europe and became important amongst European leaders, elite groups, especially in Germany and other places. And they represent Edom. And when they were with the Assyrians, when the Assyrians conquered the Israelites, a portion of them were taken straight away, almost straight away to the British Isles. Others were taken to the north, to around the Caucasus, the Caucasian Mountains, that region, all that region around there. And from there, they moved into southern Russia, and then they moved to the west. So there are several streams of migration that all converged on the west. And a portion of these exiles were taken away by the Assyrians under Phoenicians and Philistines working as proxies for them in their ships, and they established mining enterprises in southeast Spain and also in the British Isles and Brittany and France, and also in Wales. A portion of lost country was taken straight to there to work as slave labor or to colonize the regions, and that is how they got there. And they were first of all dominated, as we find in Irish sources expressing this. O'Connor wrote a whole lot of traditions explaining this, and in those regions they became independent, and they gave rise to the peoples in that area. And so this is how they got there and what they were doing there. And they had been dominated by the forces of Edom, Also, they'd assimilated themselves into the culture and the religion of the Canaanites. See 2 Kings 17, where it describes this in detail. They had become virtually Canaanites. They had stopped practicing circumcision, stopped keeping the Jewish religion. They had become virtually, according to the halakha, virtually non-Jews, according to the law, because once you do certain things and go in a certain way for several generations, you're considered a non-Jew according to the law. And they had become part of the Gentiles, and they had been dominated by the forces of Edom and assimilated into the ways of Edom and grew up under Edom. They had gone down to the depths of barbarism and of rudimentary culture. From that, they elevated themselves and came up. They brought the rest of the world up with them, and they still bring the rest of the world up with them. So Rabbi Kook is saying that they had to be this way. This is the way they had to be, so that from inside they could elevate the world and know the world as it was, because they helped give rise to it. And this fits the Messiah, son of Joseph, and his future role as bringing the 10 tribes back and helping to initiate the reform of humanity that will be completed by the Messiah, son of David.